Messiahs. Sit down with me for a minute. Today I want to invite you on a strange journey. A journey into a time when the word Messiah was not a unique title, but a repeated hope, almost a collective obsession. Most people believe that Jesus of Nazareth was the only Messiah. But history shows us something else. There were many men who rose with that claim, and all of them crashed against the same relentless power. Before we talk about them, let's pause for a moment. What is a Messiah? The word means the anointed one. Someone chosen for a sacred mission, to liberate, to restore, to bring back lost glory. In the Jewish mind of the first century, under Roman domination, the Messiah had to bring freedom, justice, and hope. Jesus was one of those names. He preached, he gathered crowds, and he was executed by Rome. But he was not the only one. Today I want to tell you the stories of the others. Those messiahs we don't remember as much, but who for many were the promise of a new era. Tsar Theudas, the miracle that never came. Picture Judea in the 40s after Christ, a weary people oppressed, always looking back to their ancient promises. That's when Theudas appeared. He was not a king or a famous priest. He was a common man with fiery words who convinced many that God would act again. His promise was bold, to open the waters of the Jordan River like Moses at the Red Sea. The symbol was powerful. If the Jordan opened, Israel would know that the new Exodus had come. Crowds followed him. Entire families walked, waiting for the miracle. But Rome does not believe in heavenly signs. The procurator Cuspius Fadus sent in his cavalry. The crowd was slaughtered. Theudas captured and his head carried to Jerusalem as a brutal warning. Think for a moment. If that river had opened, how would history have changed? Would a new Exodus have been born? Or would Rome's machinery have crushed it anyway? The memory of Theudas is brief, barely mentioned by chroniclers like Flavius Josephus, but his figure shows us the fever of those years. A people always searching for signs and an empire always ready to smother them. The Egyptian, the crowd on the Mount of Olives. A few years later, another one rose, the Egyptian. That is how history remembers him, without a personal name. This man gathered thousands and led them to the Mount of Olives, that symbolic place where, according to the prophets, God would reveal himself at the end of times. There, the Egyptian promised that the walls of Jerusalem would fall by divine intervention. Imagine that crowd, waiting, looking toward the holy city, expecting its walls to collapse, as in the days of Joshua and Jericho. The scene must have been overwhelming. Voices, raised hands, a wave of hope running through the people. But once again, Rome responded. The procurator Antonius Felix unleashed his troops. The repression was brutal. Many died, others were captured, and the Egyptian escaped, vanishing into the crowd. The mount was left in silence, witness to shattered dreams. Think for a second about the people who were there. What do you think they felt when the illusion broke? That loss also tells us how alive the expectation was in those days. John of Giscala, the warlord of Jerusalem. In the midst of the revolt against Rome, John of Giscala appeared, a Galilean leader, skillful, determined, who soon became a central figure inside Jerusalem. But beware, his story is not one of unifying leadership. The city under Roman siege was tearing itself apart. On one side stood John's followers, on the other those of Simon Bar Giora, another messianic claimant we'll talk about later. While Titus's legions tightened the noose from outside inside, brothers killed each other. Hunger, despair, and mistrust consumed the city from within. When Jerusalem fell in the year 70 after Christ, John was captured. He was not executed immediately. He was sentenced to life in chains. Bound far from his homeland, he lived out his days as the symbol of a broken promise. And now, think with me, what would have happened if John had sought unity instead of domination? Would the fate of Jerusalem have been different? Simon Bar Giora, the chained king. In the previous chapter, I mentioned Simon Bar Giora as John's direct rival. They were contemporaries, competing for messianic leadership in the chaos. Simon was of peasant origin, a man of the people who rose with force in times of war. His image was theatrical. He entered Jerusalem in a white robe, surrounded by guards, as if he were already the awaited king. For many, that vision confirmed he was the Messiah who would restore Israel's independence. But the dream turned into nightmare. Instead of joining forces with John, the two factions fought fiercely inside the city, while Titus' legions closed in from outside. Fratricidal struggle weakened resistance. Hunger and despair did the rest. When the city fell in the year 70 after Christ, Simon's fate was different from John's. While his rival was condemned to life in chains, Simon was reserved for an even greater spectacle. Rome wanted to show the entire world that no Messiah could challenge its power. Led in chains, Simon paraded in the triumph of Vespasian and Titus, the great victory procession through the streets of Rome. The Romans displayed him proudly, the king of the Jews, humiliated as a trophy. Soon after, he was executed publicly in a cruel and symbolic end. Rome not only conquered, it staged the defeat of its enemies. A Messiah turned into a spectacle, a king in chains, with no kingdom, no people, reduced to a decorative figure in an imperial parade. And the inevitable question, what would have happened if Simon and John had set aside their rivalries and united Jerusalem under a single leadership? Would the history of the city, the temple, and the Jewish people have changed? Bar Kokhba, the last dream. Decades later, when many believed the messianic fever had run its course, Simon Bar Kokhba rose, remembered as Bar Kokhba, son of the star. It was the year 132 after Christ, and for a time, it seemed the miracle had come. Bar Kokhba expelled Roman troops from much of Judea, established his own administration, and minted rebel coins with symbols of the temple. He organized a network of tunnels and caves for resistance, a harsh, ingenious defense sustained by faith and desperation. Rabbi Akiva proclaimed him the Messiah. That blessing gave him legitimacy and hope. For 3 years, the revolt seemed viable, but Rome unleashed its full might. General Julius Severus led a brutal campaign. The numbers speak of hundreds of thousands of dead. The revolt was crushed. Jerusalem was devastated and renamed Aelia Capitolina. The Jews were expelled. Bar Kokhba fell at the fortress of Betar. With his death, the last great attempt at an armed Messiah in Judea was extinguished. And then the ultimate question, what would have happened if Bar Kokhba had won? Would the map of the world look completely different? Between ovations and condemnation, let's return to Jesus. The Gospels say he entered Jerusalem riding a donkey, and the crowd received him with palms and cloaks, cheering, joy, hope in the air. But only days later, the same city demanded his death. How can we explain such a contradiction? Maybe it was not the same crowd. Perhaps the pilgrims who acclaimed him came from Galilee, and the people of Jerusalem, pressured by the elites, chose silence or demanded his head. Or perhaps the stories wanted to highlight the irony of fate. The expected Messiah turned into the rejected one. Whatever the case, the lesson is clear. Messiahs could ignite dreams in an instant. But a single turn of power, of politics, or of the crowd could bring it all crashing down. Today we reviewed Theudas, the Egyptian, John of Giscala, Simon Bar Giora, and Bar Kokhba. All raised hopes, all ended in defeat. And now I want to invite you to think with me. What would have happened if any of them had triumphed? Can you imagine what the world would be like today? Perhaps there would be no diaspora, no Sephardim, no Ashkenazim, no Kabbalah, no Yiddish. Perhaps even the very map of our world would not be the same. Rome was always there, ready to crush every dream. But the fascinating thing is that the questions remain alive. And today, as you and I talk, that echo still resounds. What would have happened if the miracle had come? And if you'd like to keep this conversation alive beyond the video, leave me your thoughts in the comments. I love reading you, and whenever possible, replying. And of course, if you want to be notified of the next chapters, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. That way we'll keep thinking together about these what-ifs that intrigue us so much.